Welcome to a new video. Today I'm out by the great burial mound in the background again, in my local area, and I'll be reading about Norse Law, and because and I'll probably do like a few of these videos, not anything chronological here. It's just more because when you read Norse Law, you get a really living image of sentiments, sense of justice, society, and all such things when you read the law with their own words. And fortunately, for the Norse times, we have, and in extension Viking times, we have complete law books extant, which is quite unique. And these law books, which were set down in the 12th and 13th centuries, are again based on Viking Age law books and law books after Olaf Haraldsson, Saint Olaf, who was of course in the Viking Age itself, Viking Age king. So the revisions are scarcely revisions. They seek to keep the law as much as possible in accordance with Olaf Haraldsson's wishes, but then make some amendments to them for serious conditions in the country. So they're very interesting because they're in their nature, the revisions are conservative. So they're preserving the law going back to the old law book, Grågås, which means grey goose, and the Viking, pre-Viking laws and practices and customs. So they represent a continuation of old law. And I'm coming on a rye field. I'd rather not walk into their field, so I think we'll just go up here. Come on. Yeah. So they represent old law, and also when you read them, they you can see lines going into modern law that are kept in law even today. And for me, when I first started reading the law books, because they're not really, you don't have so many translations of them, and perhaps there are a few into English, but they're very rare. If you can get hold of a translation, I would really suggest you do, because it's such a direct source to Middle-aged society. The same with a book called King's Mirror. This is another book that is kind of like a direct window into the sentiments of the time. It was written during Håkon Håkonsson, who was a grandson of Sverre, King Sverre, who infamously defied Rome and the papal power. But he was kind of like the latest great king until Norway devolved into chaos after the Black Death and was absorbed by Denmark eventually. Anyway, the King's Mirror was written as a educational book for the crown prince, and contained the knowledge of the trades, the knowledge of warfare, the knowledge that a king should know, and also the knowledge of nature, geography, navigation, weather, all these kinds of things, and a brief knowledge of his history. So And this is also really a direct window, and my experience, at least when reading it, was also dispelling many modern age myths about how people thought at the time and how they viewed the world around them. So that's why I think these things are interesting, and also why I want to share a few things. Also, there are some things that are so practical and so concrete that they almost become comical. So it can be a good laugh as well. Of course, if they read our laws at that time, they'd also probably have a good laugh if they tried to get through our tax code. But that's another story. And I think I think these sources are super important. I remember the first time I read, it's not Norse history, but it's a really good example of this, is having kind of digested the different like conventional explanations and portrayals of Egyptian ancient history. I was quite shocked the first time I read Diodorus Siculus, which was a Roman historian with who had stayed at the Library of Alexandria before it burned, and he's kind of counted as one of the best ancient sources for Egyptian society and history. And when he's put in doubt, it's because he relays the Egyptian pre-dynastic history, which of course is most modern historians don't put much weight on. But then again, most modern historians probably don't know so much about pre-dynastic Egypt themselves. But it's such a legendary area that it's like with the legendary sagas, it's not really touched so much. So when Siculus is put into doubt, it's often because of this, that he relayed the Egyptians' own prehistory. And you can, and also he had relayed how they viewed Babylonian prehistory, like age-old history, which personally I find is very interesting. Of course, there are inconsistencies and imprecise things and stuff of myth, but if you read it as that, if you read it as old oral stories, you don't have to be such a nitpicking perfectionist to kind of see the big lines of the story going on. Anyway, first time I read it, I was shocked about the description of dynastic Egypt, which at the time must be regarded, in my opinion, as a historic, because he was relying on living sources, on written sources within Egypt, so it must be more or less regarded as historical delivery. And his description of pre-dynastic Egypt is just, completely different from the run-of-the-mill portrayal in a National Geographic or Discovery Channel documentary. They kind of like, it's completely different. Much more sophisticated society, much more law-governed society, much more just society, rich society, and a society of the arts and culture, which of course, if you look at the archaeological remains, it's kind of self-evident. But the portrayal is often extremely rough and rude and primitive. So it's a little bit the same with the laws, the Norse laws. They give a wider picture than we often are served. And when you read them in between the lines, like, for example, the property law, the picture that emerges is of a very sophisticated society. Yeah, I think I'll start with the foreword to Frostatingslova. as given by Håkon Håkonsen. So I'll be reading, kind of translating on the fly, so it won't be elegant. I'll try to keep the meanings correct, of course, and but the language will probably be a little bit rough. King Håkon Håkonsen, son of King Håkon and grandson of King Sverre, sends shy reeves and learned men and farmers that are and will come, all gods and his own friends that live in Norway, God and his own greetings. He sends them his greetings. It will be known for most of the people how deep damage and how diverse damage most of our great families in this country have had of killing and murder of good men. Something that has been much more common in our country than in all other countries. And since this, for the first, is dangerous and hazardous in the eyes of God and people, and leads to family loss and loss of valuables, it is also shameful that in lands and countries where people have high moral character, it is known that we have these habits more than any other country. We have therefore considered carefully, through advice from the Archbishop and his bishopry, through the shire reeves and the learned men, through judges and all the most knowledgeable men in the country, how we can reduce the murders and killing. Originally, we thought it was best that the law of King Olav the Holy should stand untouched as he had set it. Even though she isn't followed because of greed. So that the one who has been killing innocent men should have had lost his valuables and his protection of the law. He should have been outlawed and unwelcome wherever he was, both in the eyes of the king and the eyes of family. So the foreword here is addressing the main legal issue of the day, which was we call blodhevn in Norway, which is blood revenge. And as King Håkon Håkonsen says, it's taking a massive toll on especially the noble families. And the period when Håkon Håkonsen is king comes after in a very tumultuous revolutionary period in Norwegian history, which partially ended, more or less ended, with his grandfather, King Sverre, who he kind of really rocked the boat in Norway and established through guerrilla-style Viking warfare. He against all odds took over Norway, gave the Pope the middle finger, and established quite an independent monarchy. But that process leading up to that was extremely violent and led to a lot of bad things. But it wasn't only during King Sverre. Also, there had been like a state of civil war for a long time. And the practice of blood revenge had devolved into, if say a person is murdered in a family, then when they were to this family were to exact revenge on the murdering family, they wouldn't necessarily go after the murderer, which would have been the practice in old times. What it had devolved into was that you would single out, say the murderer was the fifth son in a family without any real prospects of inheriting the main farm, or, you know, what he was one who in ancient times would be sent out to be a sea king if he could manage to become that. So instead of murdering him, they would single out the oldest son, who would have been brought up to inherit the estate and would have been held in high regard. So what it led to, the blood revenge, was gradually murdering of the most prominent members of the Norwegian noble families and the Norwegian farmers' families. And this, of course, weakened politically and destabilized politically. So this is the main topic for, because the first part of this law contains the rules of this amendment to King Olav, which King Olav's law didn't outlaw blood revenge. So they're adding a few laws in the beginning of the Frosta Thing's law, where they seek to address this problem. So I'll be reading a few of the laws from the amendment that Håkon Håkonsson makes in the start. And the amendment as such, many of the laws are just kind of a consolidation or a repetition, like a strengthening of old practices, but just singled out in the beginning and put kind of into a context of zero tolerance. So, if a man is killed, everybody is known with the great and evil practice that long has been in our country. That if a man has been killed, his family will seek to revenge on the best man of the offending family. No matter is paid to if he knew or was part of the murder of the dead one. And they don't reap their revenge on the killer, even if they have the opportunity. The result of this is that the original evil doer faces no consequences for his crime, while the innocent must pay for peace. And many families have had great damage done to their lineages, and we've lost the best men in our country. Therefore, the punishment for this will be outlying with no redress and confiscation of all valuables. So this is the main paragraph about punishment for murder. So usually in the law, if you committed the crime of murder, there were certain, of course you faced severe punishment and being outlawed, but your property wouldn't necessarily be confiscated. There were certain, levels of fines and stuff. But for this crime, where you murder as part of blodhevn on an innocent man, everything you own is to be confiscated, and you are made outlaw. And this is a heavy punishment for the time. Especially if you're from a noble family, then your whole estate is confiscated. In Norway, we have the term strandhogg, which was a term for from Norse times. If you take your ship up to a farm and you steal or slaughter their cattle or slaughter it on the spot, it was called or their valuables, it was called strandhogg, which means to cleave the beach, like with an axe. And so the stealing of cattle and livestock was very serious. So after the killing of innocent men, the next paragraph is on stolen livestock. And so do all the law books and the customs in our country witness. The man who takes another man's cow or other valuables by hand of theft, he can be killed wherever he is hiding. And here it's mentioned here in the part that is to address blood revenge before the law book itself starts. So these are a selection of laws that Håkon Håkonsson singles out to kind of address the problem of blood revenge. So quite clearly, when blood revenge was enacted, it was often accompanied by grievous theft. And this might sound harsh to us in these times, but many of even where you maybe have one large farm and several smaller farms, if that large farm was burnt down, all the cattle stolen, they would endanger so many lives. And of course, if you stole the cattle or livestock of a small family, come winter, they would starve to death. So the theft of livestock, which wouldn't be a big thing in our times, of course it would be serious, but yeah, it could mean certain death in those times. So it was a very serious offense. And often, next law, even if it's seen down upon by people and a very immoral thing to do, men without conscience have run away with other men's wives. Many of them have received neither little punishment or any punishment at all. And we expect most people to see this case as very serious, both in front of God and all other men. So we make it known that anyone who is found guilty of such actions will be held as outlaws without redress, both for king and farmer, and they shall be killed wherever they are hiding, and they will not have the right for a Christian grave. And you read this, of course, in many sagas, the practice of kidnapping, which they're addressing here. And trying to put an end to it. So being an outlaw was, of course, very shameful. There are several caves and in Norway that still have that are called like the cave of Eivind the outlaw and such. So your name would kind of be stuck with infamy. Of course, most nobles, if they were outlaws, they would go out of country and perhaps seek to be accepted again in Norway after a while, or after performing actions to support the king or such. But most people, it would be living a quite hard existence. For example, there's one cave, this one for the Eivind the outlaw. He stayed at about in the mountains, sadly. It's around 1,100 meters over the ocean level, which is above the tree line, which means subsistence and winters are very, very hard. So they would live quite hard lives if they managed to escape the revenge of anybody who wanted to exact revenge on them. Also in those times, I know there's a lot of there were more wolves, more bears, and maybe in this time many people have an idea that wolves are peaceful, but it's not always the case. If you read like books from this 19th century, 18th century from Norway, there are some mountain when the English climbers came over to Norway and started climbing in Norway, they wrote books. Lord Blackwell, for instance, wrote a book on it, and his descriptions are interesting because all the herders of goats and of sheep, they carry lures, like horns, or wooden like blowhorns, to scare bears away. So if you're an outlaw in at that time with a more active wildlife and hard winters, it's a tough life. I'm gonna stop there. I'll be doing more of this, taking some laws here and there that kind of put a little bit of light on aspects of society at the time. This was a little bit on blood revenge. Probably do one or two more on blood revenge, and then also on the different types of law that are mentioned in Frostatingslova and in Gulatingslova. And yeah, because I think it really invites to a different light on the society, and also on reflecting in a different way on than at least for me used to be usual to reflect on those times. And in many of the laws perhaps can inform us as well. So that was that for now, and hope you join me for the next video. Please leave a comment if you have any thoughts or criticisms or suggestions, and I'll get back to you. And if you enjoy this content, feel free to subscribe. So, see you next time.